All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books, Anderson's Bookshop, and Majors and Quinn welcomes best-selling and critically acclaimed author Thrity Umrigar, who will discuss her highly anticipated new book, Honor. Umrigar tonight will be in conversation with best-selling author Rebecca Makkai. Left Bank Books, Anderson's Bookshop, and Majors and Quinn would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Threedy and Rebecca, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstores. All of us are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We all hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books, Anderson's Bookshop, and Majors and Quinn by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends on our websites. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from one of our stores allows us to keep our bookstores and staff operating. All 3 stores offer shipping options to anywhere in the country. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment. And you can do that at any point in time throughout the event. And now, about tonight's book, Honor. In this riveting and immersive novel, best-selling author Thrity Umrigar tells the story of 2 couples and the sometimes dangerous and heartbreaking challenges of love across a cultural divide. Indian-American journalist Smita has returned to India to cover a story, but reluctantly. Long ago, she and her family left the country with no intention of ever coming back. As she follows the case of Mina, a Hindu woman attacked by members of her own village and her own family for marrying a Muslim man, Smita comes face to face with a society where tradition carries more weight than one's own heart, and a story that threatens to unearth the painful secrets of Smita's own past. While Mina's fate hangs in the balance, Smita tries in every way she can to right the scales. She also finds herself increasingly drawn to Mohan, an Indian man she meets while on assignment. But the dual love stories of Honor are as different as the cultures of Mina and Smita themselves. Smita realizes she has the freedom to enter into a casual affair, knowing she can decide later how much it means to her. In this tender and evocative novel about love, hope, familial devotion, betrayal, and sacrifice, Thrity Umrigar shows us 2 courageous women trying to navigate how to be true to their homelands and themselves at the same time. Cheryl Strayed, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Wild, says, Honor is an utterly engrossing novel about 2 very different women whose lives converge after an unspeakable act of violence in India. With insight and compassion, Thrity Umrigar writes masterfully about the complexities of hatred and love, estrangement and belonging, oppression and privilege, about holding on and letting go. A powerful, important, unforgettable book. Rebecca Makkai, the Pulitzer Prize finalist for The Great Believers, says, Honor is a novel of profound depths, cultural, personal, romantic, spiritual. It's also a story of tremendous grace, both in the understanding it shows its characters and in the ways they navigate a brutal but stunning life. And Reese Witherspoon, for the January 2022 Reese's Book Club pick, says, complex and unfiltered. These are the type of characters that stick with you long after you turn the pages. Powerful story about family, devotion, and cultural truths, all through the eyes of an incredible journalist. And now, about tonight's speakers. Thrity Umrigar is the best-selling author of 8 novels, including The Space Between Us, which was a finalist for the PEN Beyond Margins Award, as well as a memoir and 3 picture books. Her books have been translated into several languages and published in more than 15 countries. She is the winner of a Lambda Literary Award and a Seth Rosenberg Award, and is Distinguished Professor of English at Case Western Reserve University. A recipient of the Nieman Fellowship to Harvard, she has contributed to the Boston Globe, the New York Post, the New York Times, and Huffington Post. And tonight, Thrity will be in conversation with Rebecca Makkai. Rebecca is the Chicago-based author of the novels The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, and The Borrower, as well as the short story collection Music for Wartime. The Great Believers was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, and received the ALA Carnegie Medal and the LA Times Book Prize, among other honors. Makkai is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University. She is Artistic Director of Story Studio Chicago. And now, without further ado, I would love to welcome our guests for the evening, two of my personal favorite authors, Thrity Umrigar and Rebecca Makkai for Left Bank Books, Anderson's Bookshop, and Majors and Quinn. If you could please help me in giving them a giant round of applause. Hello.
Hey.
Thank you, Shane. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello. I'm going to save it for later, but at the end, when we thank all the bookstores, I'm going to tell everyone a story about Shane too, because I always tell. I have several very flattering stories about Shane, and I'll tell them later to embarrass him. But for now, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you,
because I know that everyone's excited to get to the book.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do is Thrity and I are going to talk for a while, and she said she doesn't want to read to you tonight, wants you to read it in your own voice, which I kind of like anyway. I'd always rather pick the author's brain and read later on my own. So we'll do that, and then the last 15 minutes or so we'll have audience questions, and you can type those anytime, but we'll only see them at the end, if that makes sense. So, hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. And it's if the price of seeing you again was to write a whole book, man, was it worth it? So, hey, Rebecca.
Nice. Yeah, we last saw each other, I can't even, in the before times. It's just
before times. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just before, I think maybe a year or so before COVID hit. And we didn't even, I knew I was lucky because you came to my house without, as a stranger and left as a friend. But
I was very lucky because I got to eat amazing food, and and it was a great night. Yeah,
it was a great night. Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy. So this book came out a week ago today. Is that right? 2 weeks ago.
I think actually today my math is bad. It came out on the 4th, so I think that's
it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah.
That sounds right. Okay.
Time really does go by fast.
Yeah, I have no idea what day it is. I knew it was a Tuesday, so I figured it was either 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks, I think.
And already just, huge things, incredibly positive reviews, a beautiful interview with you in the LA Times, just all kinds of wonderful stuff. And this Reese's Book Club pick, which you must have known about for a while because they printed it up with the thing on the cover. So you definitely knew about this you had to keep it a secret for a little while?
Oh yeah. More than a little while. I think I got a text or a phone call or maybe an email from my editor as it happened on my birthday in September. And she said, I think it was a Saturday, and she said, can we talk? And I was like, I just thought it was bad news. Can we talk? Like when an editor calls you, that early, you just sort of have a feeling. So I was like, can we, I just wanted to have a good birthday. So I was like, can we do this a little later? And she said, no. We're setting up a Zoom call and the whole team's going to be there. So I was like, had no idea, right? So then it was so sweet because they were just so pleased and excited about it. And it was very moving, actually, just to see their reactions because they had worked. You know how it is. A book is a collaboration. It's teamwork. And we are the ones who get our names on a jacket. But, it's a lot of people spending a lot of time to bring a book out. So they were very excited. And then came the hard part, which was keeping it a secret. And there were times when I slipped actually and sort of, posted a picture of myself holding up the book with the little thing, and that was their reaction, and it was like, take it down now,
Oh my God.
So, but it all ended up being fine, and for the most
Yeah.
part, it did come as a pleasant surprise when that day finally came about. So,
Amazing. One of the things that I think people don't necessarily intuit is we have several different actors who have book clubs or endorse books or do a lot of adapting of books for movies. Good actors are incredible readers. Like they really have to be. If you think about what they're actually doing, it's textual interpretation that they're doing. Like they're doing dramaturgy all day long.
Yeah, that's nicely said. And it's even more than that, right? Because I'm assuming when they read scripts, right, they have to develop that critical analytical sense of like, this is a dog, and this is really something that's great, right?
Yeah.
So that must come. It's a developed talent, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah, because you see, there's some actors who, they're good actors, but they're continually in kind of iffy movies, and you're thinking, it can't be that this was the only script he was offered. I think he just doesn't have the taste level, right? And then there are some actors who just have exquisite taste, and they're just really solid readers. And so I'm just, I think it's partly, I'm saying that partly to explain, just in case people, I think that people have learned to take those book clubs really seriously. And that those are really solid picks again and again and again. And also these actors tend to have people around them who are curating and filtering the books.
And one of the gratifying things about this process, when it was being kept under wraps, is I did have one Zoom meeting, I think in December, with the book club team that works with Reese. And I actually got a chance to say thank you to the woman who said, I was the one who read it first and handed it to Reese and said, you got to read this book. And, that doesn't happen often in life, right? Where you get to personally thank a person who has helped you in some way, right? Because so much of life happens behind the scenes. So that was a nice moment also.
And so much of it happens when we don't even know. Like it's strange enough when you're publishing a book to realize at a certain point there are people having meetings about me, and I don't know when it's happening or what they're talking about. And then to go, God, on some stupid Wednesday when I was, in a bad mood, someone was handing someone my book, and it just made this huge difference.
Yeah. A lot of our lives happen without us being center stage, It happens in the wings, or when we are in the wings, or something like that.
Yeah. And for authors, maybe more than some other people just in general, because you put your book out there, and who reads it when they read it, not even in a way that we're ever going to hear about, but just the day someone picks it up and it means something to them is not something we're there for.
Right. I say this to audiences all the time, that the day a book is published, it no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the person who's reading it. And certainly even before that, the whole production process. Yeah.
Right.
I've always thought, how we have credits that roll at the end of a movie.
Yes.
If there was some way of doing that with books, right? The art department, the person who designs the jacket, the publicist, the marketing people, just all these people that readers never hear about, and they play such a huge role in the life of a book.
And some of them get thanked in the author note, but even then, like it would help to have music playing behind it.
That's right. That's exactly right. I want credits to roll, just roll.
People are stuck there finding their coat still, and they have to look at it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, so the book itself, oh my God. Okay. So I was privileged to read this several months ago, maybe even in the summer, I can't remember.
Somewhere there.
It's just kind of a big stapled or bound arc with the beautiful cover, kind of color copied onto the front. And just, it came into my life in a time when I had a lot of things I needed to read. It was, so, you pick up each thing going, well, I'm picking this up because I know it's brilliant, but God, I really hope for my sake that it's also a juicy read. because of the amount of stuff. And that certainly the mangoes on the front promise a juiciness, from the description, but then getting in, it's so character driven in a really kind of, I'm going to say old fashioned, and this is not an old fashioned book, but I mean in sort of a let's go on an adventure kind of way.
Yeah.
Which leads me to my first question for you. So there's this old saw that every story is either about a stranger coming to town or someone going on a journey. And of course, that's really reductive, but it's fun to say. But the someone going on a journey part, I like to break down further when I'm thinking about it and think about the characters who choose to go on journeys and the characters who have journeys thrust upon them.
Mm-hmm.
So like the choose to go on a journey is like the Don Quixote, like I'm going to whatever. And the journeys thrust upon them, my examples are always Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, like she didn't ask for any of this, or Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit, where he is like persuaded to go on this adventure. And one of the first things in the first pages that I loved about this is Smita, essentially your main character. It's really two main characters, but she's really the one we're with most of the time. She ends up back in India almost under false pretenses. She didn't know what she was getting herself into. Her vacation is interrupted. She didn't ask for any of this. Now she's doing this journalism. And this guy who picked her up from the airport is now actually her driver and translator. And she wasn't looking for romance, but now this thing is happening. So I would love to hear from you a little bit about, this is a very craft wonk nerdy question. How did you manage to make a character who really had this journey thrust upon her rather than seeking it out, and yet who is not passive? Because the risk of that kind of character is that they just sit there and stuff happens to them. And she's not passive. And I want to know how you did that.
I have no idea. And it's such an interesting sort of dive into the novel. And it's, I think only a fellow writer perhaps could have picked up on this particular dimension of it. Because honestly, not so much with the starting point that you mentioned, which is, the opening scene as Smita lands at Bombay Airport. And we learn in the very first chapter that she's very, very reluctant to be revisiting the city of her birth, right? Which she has left as a teenager with her family under very mysterious circumstances. But by the time the plot the book gets cooking and, she is making that drive into the interior, into this village where Mina, the other character of the novel, resides to cover her story. Smita is a journalist based in New York, sort of nosedives into India to cover this story. I too, while writing it, was very much thinking of that journey, that progression, as being a journey into a kind of heart of darkness. So that motif or trope or whatever you want to call it, I was aware of that, that they're going deeper and deeper into this thick, witch's brew that's just going to trap them, So I find it particularly interesting that you picked up on that aspect of the novel too. How did I make Smita not a passive character? These circumstances, her arrival in Bombay has clearly been forced upon her. She thinks she's doing the friend covering the story a favor. Turns out there's some miscommunication there. So she is sort of a passive, I would never dare call her a victim, but she is being acted upon up to that part. But Smita herself, I mean, she's a foreign correspondent. I don't think you get to be a foreign correspondent by being passive. She's used to having. She's a free, independent woman. She's used to having agency. She's used to. So I think it's her central character that takes things in her stride. It's her profession to do so, to sort of greet obstacles and then find ways to maneuver around them. And that instinct, I think, just kicks in, especially once she gets interested in the story that she's about to cover.
I think you do that too. I'm hearing it myself. I hope that's not affecting other people. Anyway, there's a scene really early on. She's kind of getting there and still figuring, oh, go here, no, go here, you're going to do this. But she takes it upon herself to revisit her old neighborhood and to find, I'll be relatively spoiler careful here, but to find her mother's former best friend who betrayed the family in a certain way. And where I think another character would have just had this very cautious conversation, she just comes right out and is like, well, you ruined everyone's life, says enough to get her kicked out. So I think that scene helped me a lot. So early on, rather than just being dragged along, it was like, oh, we don't know what she's gonna do. She's capable of a lot of action.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Maybe somebody else would have just said, let bygones be bygones. I'm only here for a couple of days, then I'm moving to cover the story. But that just doesn't sit well with her. And, she has a father back in America, and she almost wants to carry, I think, this interaction with a former neighbor as a kind of trophy, as a kind of perhaps even a consolation prize for the father, who has lost so much. And so I think she comes from a good place. And then also she's a reporter. She's genuinely curious about, what happened in the past.
She's too young to understand.
Yeah. She wants to understand her own story a little bit better. And she cannot do it without getting, as you would in journalism, the other side of the story. She's trying to get at the story, even in that instance.
Yeah. Well, this is, in many ways, it's a novel of repatriation is the wrong word, because she's not going, okay, I'm going to move back home and that's my intention. But I've been really interested in the past few years in seeing American novels about either repatriation or someone visiting, often someone more in my situation where the child of immigrants themselves then going to this place really is an American who never lived there and kind of investigating the past in some way, right? And I think that I'll be careful what I say here, but some of those novels start to all sound the same to me after a while. Especially I think the ones where it's sort of a millennial American protagonist. Really, it's about discovering their split identity, and they're great. They're beautiful novels. The best ones obviously really stand out and do something really important, unusual, idiosyncratic. Some of them start to sound the same, but that's going to be true of any move in fiction. Some of them, right? Where this one, there are many different ways that this one stands out, and one of them is it's not quite in that category because you, like Smita, were born in India. You came here really as a young adult, whereas she came as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
So, this is, to me, it's a book about that return, but that's not entirely obsessed with that return. And that's one of the things that's maybe the most interesting to me, is there's so much else going on. But can you talk a little bit about, I'm not necessarily asking you the autobiographical question, although you're welcome to take it in that direction if you want, but that move of writing about someone who is pretty fundamentally American. She gets recognized as American everywhere she goes.
Right.
Just cab drivers, whoever, are like, oh, you're American. Yeah. She's become American, and then re-entering this place, both, as an outsider, but also in this case as someone whose homeland this really was. She really did grow up here. This was her neighborhood. It's a very broad question, but I'm wondering if you can talk about that aspect of writing. That's kind of that writing someone with a kind of a split national identity. How your own life might have informed that, or to what extent is that imagination? To what extent is it other things going on?
Yeah, it's actually it's a brilliant question. And by the way, I agree with one early aspect of what you said, which is I too have read probably the same novels that you're thinking of about, the experience of sort of going back, and a lot of those novels deal with issues of identity. I mean, that is the central focus. That's
Yeah.
the central claim of those novels, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I too do sometimes feel like, I don't know, just a little, is that all there is, right? Because ultimately it seems insular, and it seems like a small story to tell of one individual character's interactions
Right.
with that. And I suppose, I mean, perhaps I'm being unfair when I characterize those books in that manner, because ultimately most novels talk about a singular experience. I mean, right? But I would like to believe that in Smita's reassessment of her relationship with India, it's not so much that she's simply searching for her own identity, shall we say, but in a sense, I think she's searching for India's identity.
Yeah.
She's trying to grapple with perhaps a slightly larger
That's
question,
what it is.
right?
Yeah,
Of a kind of, and you're making me realize this. I mean, honestly, I'm not, this is the sign of a good interviewer. Trust me, I know this. I've been on the other side of this. I was a journalist for a very long time before I became a novelist. So I can tip my hat to a good questioner when I come across one. But yeah, I think that's what's going on, right? That she's trying to say, what is this country? What is this country in the 21st century, right? I mean, a country that produces every year the world's greatest number of engineers and doctors and scientists. How can that same country also be so patriarchal and so traditional in certain aspects, right? And then, of course, there is that question of, and is there a place for me, right? That's when the personal identity question comes in for her. Is there a place for me in this country? And is there any way to embrace what works, what's rich and beautiful and tender about this country, and completely reject all the stuff that is not good, and there's plenty of each, right? And I think so. It's not like I was trying to deliberately write a novel that had a twist on this idea and sort of talk or write against, the traditional going home novel. But I'm always interested, as I think you are as a writer, in a larger conversation than a narrowly prescribed one.
Yeah. Well, I think, and again, it's not that I have nothing against this kind of book, but so many of those are really coming of age stories, sort of a young adult, the story of someone in their 20s going and they're finding themselves. And it is a novel of the self, and that's what it is. But this is a novel. She's examining India's identity. There's also a great deal of examination of America's identity in the background here. Some of it overt with conversations with her father, and some of it just the parallels. I feel like this was definitely a novel of the Trump era in many ways, in addition to being this novel that's fundamentally about India and its complexities, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Do you want to say that a little bit? Or, I mean, do you feel this was? I'm assuming this is the book that you wrote as America is having, a major identity crisis.
Yeah,
and India's ongoing.
And while I was writing it, while I'm writing about Hindus hating Muslims and Muslims hating Hindus and just all this inner, here we'd call it interracial, there it's interreligious, interfaith stuff that's happening. Yeah, of course, I couldn't help but think, the Muslim ban was happening when I started writing this book. I mean, there were just so many parallels, and it left me really saddened and bewildered. When I came to this country as a starry-eyed, 21-year-old, fell in love, lost my heart to this country within, I would say, months of being here. Like always said, this country fits me like a glove. Like I don't understand this almost psychic, spiritual connection that I have with my adopted country. Gave up a great deal to become a citizen here, claim this as my country. And then, you fast forward a few decades and suddenly it feels like, oh my God, what happened? I thought India was supposed to become more like America. And in some strange way, I feel like we're slipping in some opposite direction, So yeah, it was very much on my mind. And Rebecca, I'll just tell you one quick story that I think I finished writing the book before I even realized what I was writing to refute. When I was touring with my last book, The Secrets Between Us, I did this event at some very fancy country club. And during the Q&A, this older woman stood up, raised her hand, and asked this question. And she basically said, "Why are people in India so mean? Why is it such a horrible place? Why do people do these terrible things to one another?" And I mean, I can laugh about it now, but
but that's deeply offensive and then you're put on the spot in that moment too.
Right. I mean, and I was just like, I'd never had something like this happen, because readers are usually pretty hip and they understand that no novel is a stand-in for any nation or any culture, much less a country of 1 billion people. I mean, how can it be? So I sort of stumbled my way through an answer. But I have to say that some part of that conversation or that one-sided conversation remained with me, And I think the ambivalence that Smita has towards India, especially early on, I can't help but think that subconsciously I was drawing on that. And a lot of the novel was an answer through Smita, was an answer to that question, which is to say, but it's not. I mean, it cannot be that reductive. You can never reduce any nation, to its lowest common denominator. It's all of it. It's everything, because that's what humanity is. Humanity is all of it, right? And so the novel just reflects one slice of that.
Well, I think the novel reflects many slices of it, which is why it's such which is, I think, a lot of what you're doing, right? You're showing you have the city and the country, you have the educated and the uneducated, you have a lot of characters. It's not like it's, thousands of characters, but you have tremendous diversity of characters. And then between Smita and Mina, who's our other point of view character, I think when we get contradiction on the page, which is a lot of what you've done in many different ways, that's when things become really three-dimensional. I don't want to give that woman any credit for what you wrote, but I think you would have written something that's three-dimensional regardless. But what you've done is something really complex. I think it would be absolutely impossible for someone to read this book. I think it would be impossible for her to have read your previous books too. But anyway, and to come away and think, oh, this book has taught me that India is this one thing or this one.
But see, Rebecca, when you are an immigrant writer, you rightly or wrongly, you sort of fancy yourself as somebody who can act as a kind of ambassador between multiple cultures. You can introduce one culture to another that may not otherwise recognize one another, you know. And the hope, of course, is always that in telling a specific story about this country or this culture or telling these characters, that what you're also doing is illuminating something about the reader's culture,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's the hope. This was the opposite of that hope. So I think that's the only reason I'm
Yeah.
bringing it up to you all these years later, you know.
I can't imagine that she had actually read your book. Someone who had like read the back and was like, "Oh, it comes with a luncheon."
No. Yeah.
I have something to say. Oh God. Well, so actually, I want to talk in part about that kind of two-handed, the double lead character in this novel. And so I bring up actually a different previous book. So I think I've mentioned to you that my favorite of your books is The Story Hour, which I just, it was, I think partly because it was the first book of yours I read, so you kind of imprint like a baby duck on the first thing, like, oh, this is great. Anyway, if anyone's looking to buy a hardcover and a paperback, go nicely together. Highly recommend The Story Hour. But that too is really a two-voice novel. Basically, to be reductive, a therapist and a patient. That's not doing the novel any justice. Leading incredibly different lives, coming together, coming apart. And I see this, it's doing really different things. It doesn't feel like you're following the same, it's not like some formula or anything like that. But again, you have this two-voice novel fundamentally, that again, I think plays to so many of your strengths and the book's strengths in giving, this complexity of voice. So I would love to hear from you. So anyone who picks this up, you're going to read the first few chapters and be like, what are you talking about? This is all Smita's point of view. And then Mina's comes in, and it's not as dominant, but we also are, because Smita is so fixated. Mina, for people who haven't read it yet, Mina is the woman whose husband has been killed by her brothers, and she was really disfigured in this attack and is bringing this to the courts, and Smita is, the journalist writing about her. I think because Smita is so focused herself on Mina, that brings Mina's story to the fore also. But can you talk a little bit about developing this as a two-voice novel? Was it always that way in the writing? Did that evolve later? And how did you find that balance? It's not just back and forth between the two.
Right. I think that's a departure point, if I'm remembering correctly, from The Story Hour, because
I'm remembering, yes.
Right. I think The Story Hour is more even-handed, where you do go one chapter after another from one point of view to another. Here, as you pointed out, Mina basically enters the narrative when Smita meets her for the first time, right? So she's delayed. I think she doesn't appear until book 2 or something like that. I couldn't have imagined writing this novel from just Smita and Mohan, let's say, point of view. I thought Mina had to speak, and not just speak to Smita when she's being interviewed by Smita. I felt that Mina had to speak to the reader directly in the first person, and tell us her own story. Tell us a little bit about her family, but most importantly, tell us the story of really the events that define her in this book, which is 1, accepting a job outside the home against the wishes of her brothers, and 2, compounding that mistake by falling in love, and then compounding that mistake by falling in love with a Muslim man, right? And then marrying him, and then the wrath of the patriarchy basically comes down upon her. I just felt like Mina had earned her place in this book. In some sense, it is Smita's story. It's her evolution. It's her character arc that we mostly follow through the course of the book. But one of the things I was also certain that I wanted to do in this book is to sort of flip that conventional, Smita's the one with the education, she's the one from overseas, she's the one with wealth and power and language skills and, access to newspapers in New York. I wanted to flip that paradigm of privilege, if you will, so that in some ways Mina, with none of these gifts, none of these privileges that Smita has, Mina is the heart of the book to me. I mean, she's the one who's courageous, you know, and Smita, for all her adventures and global travels and, you know, professional success, is not brave. At least she's not brave when we first meet her, you know. She has trauma from her past that sadly, in some ways, has certainly defined her relationship with India. But it has also, she's a pretty constricted and narrow human being, you know, when we first meet her. And,
like I said, she's the one who has to be dragged on this adventure.
Exactly. Yeah. So she's not passive in the sense that, you know, she's not just somebody who sits there and has life's events happen upon her, but her inner life is passive or cold, you know. She's not a risk taker in terms of losing her heart, of wearing her heart on her sleeve, or being passionate about, you know, she's not like that. And Mina is all those things. And there was something nice about that paradox that I felt was interesting to me to explore, you know?
Yeah. They have very different voices too. And that's always something that, you know, we have to work hard. You know, any author has to work hard so that not every character just sounds like us. Not every character has our sense of humor and our figures of speech. You know, Mina's voice, maybe Mina being a character who in life story is less similar to you, less similar in education and that kind of thing. Was that voice any more challenging to tap into then?
Plenty more.
Yeah.
Plenty more challenging. Yeah. I really, you know, even though maybe that's why she only gets a few chapters, Rebecca, I don't know, because, you know, I was trying to do two seemingly contradictory things with Mina's voice. One, I wanted her to sound like who she is. You know, she's a young woman, very naive, until the events of the book, has hardly ever stepped foot out of her village, you know, has led a very, very sheltered and small life. And there's a kind of innocence to her. You know, she's an unworldly, uneducated young girl. She's the daughter and the sister of peasants. And yet I wanted her language, which after all is the only way we really get to see her, I wanted her language to have a kind of musicality to it. I wanted her to be profound in her own simple way, you know, and it was a challenge for me to thread that needle. I had to rewrite, you know, some of her sections quite a bit and say, no, this is how you would talk. But she doesn't think in terms of metaphor, for instance, you know.
Right.
So how can you have her saying the most basic everyday things and yet not have it sound like the most basic everyday things, right? To just interject that quality that makes it aha, you know, like that. I'm not saying that I succeeded in doing that. I'm
saying you succeeded. So how about
I'm just saying that was something that I was aware of, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, no, the voices came off as tremendously different. In a you know, not in a show-offy, voicey, creative writing assignment kind of way, right? They just felt really organically different, which is why I'm bringing it up. I think it's you know, as always, one of the strengths there. So Shane is letting us know that we already have some really good questions, not answers. We'll see about the answers. We already have really good questions. And in the next couple minutes, if you guys want to tune me out for a second and type in other questions, then Shane's going to pop in here and ask them. But I think, you know, what we can do while we're doing that is I think we always wait. We tend to always wait until the end to thank the bookstores. And we can take a moment right now just to say, these are three phenomenal independent bookstores. I don't know which one sent you here or if you came here from our Twitter or whatever, but Anderson's Books near Chicago, I've been there for every single book. It might be the only bookstore I've been to for every single book. I'm not sure. Majors and Quinn in Minneapolis was where I did my very first reading for my very first book. And I've never been more nervous. And they were so nice to me. And I love them forever. And then Left Bank Books, which is where Shane is from. And here's the question. I said I was going to tell a flattering story about Shane. I have several. But this one is Shane is legendary for like turning any event of any size into this great success. And I have a friend, a writer in Chicago, who for reasons absolutely beyond the control of the bookstore, it was like a snowstorm or something, basically ended up with no one at a reading. And it happens to all of us. It happens to absolutely everyone. And Shane, before she left, had managed to sell her book to her driver. Like there was no one to sell it to, and he still sold her book.
Oh my gosh.
This is like just a great bookseller.
Oh, awesome. Bravo. What a great story. I'll never forget that.
This was an event absolutely beyond his control, but I love that story.
You should give us lessons in how to sell books.
Well, it starts with writing fantastic books, which both of you do very, very well. So, because it's hard to sell a book that is not something that I'm passionate about. And both of your books, all of your books, I'm passionate about. So they are very easy to put it in the hands of people with confidence and say, read this. It will.
Look how he turned it around, Rebecca.
I know. See,
smooth as anything. Beautiful. Thank you.
Well, we do have a lot of really good questions, but there's still time for more if you have questions that you are thinking of right now. I want to say that we have people watching from literally coast to coast. Ellen says hello from San Francisco, and Judy says hello from Bath, Maine. So not just on Facebook and Twitter or Facebook and YouTube, but across the country, people are watching from literally everywhere, which is fantastic.
It's Rebecca there watching.
They came for Shane. We all know.
I feel like Reese is probably here right now, just sitting in the background being like, oh, I'm so happy and proud. Like
that would be amazing if she's in disguise and she's asking questions as like Humphrey or something.
Yes. I can't wait till the day I get to meet Reese and just tell her I agree with everything you've ever read. Like, let's start with a question from Laura. Laura says, you write about class indifferences with great compassion, while also protecting the inherent dignity of those who have almost no material goods. How do India and the US compare in that regard?
In regard to, I know this is a written question, but
I think in regard to the class differences and how kind of different characters might have different relations.
Yeah. So, it's funny, right? In this country, we sort of pride ourselves on being a classless society. And I don't know if anybody still even says that with a straight face, because that has been proven to be wrong, years ago. But I do think that the big difference, and let's just talk about poverty in the two countries, is that in India, poverty is visual. It's in your face. Doesn't matter how much wealth you have. There is no escaping it, So the classic thing, I'll just speak about the city of Bombay, which is where I grew up. I mean, you can literally come down, the 35th floor of a skyscraper where you have, faucets made of 24-karat gold. And you cross the street, and there is a family of 4 or 5 living under a tree with a tarp over their heads, and that's home, right? And you see it, right? You may not do anything about it. It may not affect you in any way, but it's inescapable, right? Over here, if you have the means, I think it is possible for the most part. We are segregated not just by race, but we are segregated very often by class also. And that, to me, is one of the big differences in, poverty is something that one can choose to escape. here in ways that it's not possible. Beyond, I can't really extrapolate from that. I can't say one is good and the other is not. This is just something that I've observed in terms of how it looks different and plays different in different countries. But that doesn't mean it's any less severe or any less insidious over here than it is elsewhere.
Patricia says, searching for, let me skip to the question. Well, so Patricia says, I was very happy with the ending and how her feelings for the country began to be resolved. And I will say, without any
no
spoilers, very important, did you always know how the book was going to end?
I think so. I think so. I am not a brave writer. I will just admit it publicly. And what I mean by that is I have such admiration for, I have a lot of writer friends who literally start a novel with one line, the first line, right? They don't know the second line. I mean, even verbalizing this out loud, like, petrifies me. Like, I can't imagine committing to this project that's going to chew up like at least a year, if not more, of your life and only know the opening line, right? I'm not that writer, you know. I just, the way my brain works, I can't like go for a walk and not think about my novel. And if I think about my novel, I know what's going to happen next. And sometimes I know the ending. And yes, there have been books where I've known the last line. I've known the first line and the last line. And then I've just had to string those two lines together until I got a book out of it, you know? So I do think that in some loosey-goosey way, I think I did know that if Smita starts here, I mean, if this is the starting point of her journey, you know, this great reluctance to step foot into this country that she's vowed never to see again, something has to happen, you know. What I didn't know is what that something would be that would make her, again, no spoilers, but you know, that would change her in the process, because a book where characters remain stagnant is not fun to read, and it's not fun to write, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to skip ahead to this question since you talked about having like a line, because Jesse attached to a line that I also attached to when I was reading. So Jesse says, hi, Thrity. I'm a huge fan, have been for years. Quick question. What prompted you to write the line, the most dangerous animal in the world is a man with wounded pride? And that's on page 131 for anyone that has a copy in front of them. In other words, is there a specific example you experienced, read about, to cause you to write this? How did the thought come to you? When I read it, I immediately thought you were exactly right. And I thought it was a beautiful line myself.
You know, the line was truly just in service of the novel. I don't think this is taking anything away from the book to tell the audience that Mina has these two brothers who are just wild with anger at her for just transgressing and not following the rules. And even the fact that she works outside the home reduces their male status in this little village that they live in. And it wounds their male ego and their male pride. And it causes them to do her great harm. So the line just stemmed organically from characterizing them. And also, you know, this is a line that Mina says after the fact, in retrospect. So she's thinking back on the events, you know, and I think the lines that precede it is something like, you know, when we were kids, we were taught to be afraid of tigers and lions. And it's not as if there are tigers and lions roaming around this village where she was raised, but, you know, those are the kinds of stories that most children, rural children, would hear, you know, beware of wildlife, beware of wild, but it just seemed logical. So no, the line doesn't come out of any lived experience, but it's just in service to the plot and the characters of the novel.
It is a beautiful line, though. One of many in the book.
Thank you.
It's devastating. It's I mean, it's a gut punch because it's yeah.
Last question from the audience. Walt is asking, can you comment on the significance of the cover, of the image on the book cover?
Yeah, so as Rebecca will, I think, second me in this, writers don't, we don't do the art. Obviously, that's the art department who comes up with the art. And for somebody who can't even draw a straight line, I'm thankful that is not something that we are expected to do. But good publishers and good editors, which luckily we have, will always share the jacket with the writer and ask for input. And the mangoes in this case play a very small but important role in the novel. When Mina and Abdul's courtship begins, again, they are both marginalized poor people. They're both working in this little factory just outside their respective villages. So he doesn't have a lot of money. There's not going to be any, walks on the beach and candlelight dinners for them. But he gives her this very humble offering of mangoes. And it's a very, very small scene in the book, but obviously whoever designed the art jacket in the art department was drawn to that imagery and put that on the jacket. And I think it's a very arresting and beautiful looking jacket.
One of the things I love is just, I mean, it's such a small thing, but the way the leaves play with the font and go, it's just gorgeous.
Yes, and also the fact, Rebecca, that if you see some of the mango is ripe, but some of it is still green and raw.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of thought that has gone into this drawing, into this artwork.
Yeah.
Which is why I still go back to the rolling credits.
No kidding. Yeah. And then I like how Reese's book club is the third fruit on the tree. Not really. It's these things get added, but we sort of see the cover without it still at the same time. So it's not, but it's the third ripe fruit ready for. So actually, can I ask one last question?
Yes, please.
Which is that the last time I saw you, you also had this children's book, The Sugar and Milk, that was about to come out, and I believe it's available now. It was such a, it's just a completely different side of you as an author, but just this beautiful picture book, essentially about immigration, and I still remember every word of it that I got to see. That has that experience of putting that out into the world, and the other you have two picture books, is that right?
3 now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because Vinny's Diwali came out 1 month before Sugar and Milk did.
Right, I knew there were two really close together. Okay.
Back then, in the middle of the pandemic, I might add. So yeah.
I'm mentioning this partly because people who are online and maybe have already bought your book, and this is like just a great other thing to pick up for children in your life, or for your favorite local schools drop off or whatever. But for me the Sugar and Milk one was the one I wanted to buy it for like one copy for every Montessori school in my town kind of thing. Just really quickly as we end, has the process of writing for young children like that, has that changed your storytelling, do you think?
I'm not sure. Probably not. It's just such a different medium. I mean, maybe I'm being too hasty in saying probably not. I think everything that we write influences the next thing that we do. I know that when I teach, somehow in ways that I would never be able to sort of chart out or diagram, that influences the way I write. The way I write influences the way I teach.
Sure.
I do think it all bleeds into one.
Yeah.
the discipline of writing children's books is, I think, closest to the discipline of writing poetry.
Yes.
Just the economy of language, like making every word count. It shouldn't be this way, but sometimes in novels you can perhaps get away with a little bit of flab, because a novel is, you're writing a 300 plus page book. Yeah, you probably can get away with a few lines or a few pages of flab. You can't do that in a children's book, and there's a kind of rhythm in that language that's important, because children are the world's greatest musicians. I think they just pick up on music and sound and things like that, and language and rhythm. So I guess the more you do of any discipline, it does then bleed over or translate into something else. So basically, I'm completely contradicting myself in the 30 seconds and saying, yeah, that's great. Of course it does.
Yes. That's just a bit, anyone who hasn't checked those out should check those out as well. That's all I'm saying. So Thrity, thank you and congratulations. This is just a spectacular book.
Rebecca, thank you. Thank you for blurbing my book. Thank you for doing this. And above all, thank you for writing just the marvelous books that you do. And as if that's not enough of a gift to the world, thank you for being the human being that you are. You're just a great person. And I thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank both of you so much. I want to thank our partner bookstores, Anderson's Bookshop and Majors and Quinn. Thank you. Sorry. I thought that I said Anderson's Bookshop wrong because I've been saying Anderson's Books and it's Anderson's Bookshop. So I thought that I said it wrong for a second. But they have been incredible to work with always, but especially for this event. And Thrity, I will say, similar to Rebecca, as soon as you find that first book of yours, like to pick up and read. And I hope so many people, I hope for them it is honor where they pick up this book, read it, absolutely fall in love with you as an author, and then read everything you've ever done and continue to read you for years and years and years.
Sell it to my driver if I ever have it. That's all I ask of you.
I will, yes. But you were both brilliant, two of my favorite authors. So I cannot wait until the next time we get to have you in St. Louis. And to everyone watching as well, thank you for joining us from coast to coast. And we hope to see you all again really soon.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for doing this for me. I so appreciate all three bookstores and the two of you. Thank you. And to all who were listening, thank you so much.